I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to episode 128 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today's episode is a little different. It's a special episode. Because of the sentencing of the Golden State Killer, we felt our listeners would be interested in hearing a rebroadcast of our episode on I'll Be Gone in the Dark, the book that was written by Michelle McNamara, and we talked to Paul Haynes, who was a researcher with Michelle, and then he and several others finished her book after her untimely death. I think this is an important episode, and I hope you enjoy it. And after the rebroadcast, we will have an update with Paul that was recorded before the sentencing of Joseph DeAngelo.
I don't know if our listeners are aware that the sentencing happened on Friday the 21st. They did 3 days of victim statements, and then the judge read the sentencing. I watched some of the victim statements, and there were a couple that really stuck with me. I won't use any of their names because they don't need any more press than they've already gotten. They were mostly referred to during the trial as Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, so on. This woman said, as a Christian woman, there's a quarter of her that wishes that God have mercy on his soul, but the other 3/4 says she hopes he rots in hell. Then there was a woman that said she pretended life was fine, but then she turned to drugs and alcohol to dull the pain, and she considers herself a survivor because she's learned to rise above it, but he is always there in the background. I really feel for these people, and unfortunately their pain lives on. Even though there is no chance of Joseph DeAngelo getting out of jail, they have to live with this every day. My heart goes out to them.
I don't know how you ever relax after something like that. You live your life and you think everything's wonderful, and then this horrible man takes your peace of mind away from you. It helps that he's going to be in prison for 26 life sentences.
And he's what, in his
70s?
He'll never see the light of day.
During the trial, the people were listed as Jane Does. When the judge read the sentence, he read every name of a victim. I thought that was very important to do, to give those people and their families some justice. What he did to their family member, he is going to be punished. I was in awe.
After they finished the victim statements, he finally spoke. It was the first time I personally had got to hear what he sounds like, but it was very short, and he just said, I'm really sorry, and I listened to every one of the statements. He was very stoic. He showed no emotion. Then he sat down. I don't think that's going to make them feel any better.
He listened to all the statements because he was forced to. He had to sit there through it.
I was reading some of the comments under the video. They feel that the only reading material that he should be allowed in his cell are the victim statements.
I think they play them back every day.
I don't know. I think he kind of gets off on that. If you're a sick individual, it's my greatest playlist.
If you watch the hearing where he pled guilty, he had this, I'm such a poor old man. and I'm in a wheelchair and I'm so sick. But when he stood up, you saw the power in that man. That man is not disabled. He is not withered, and his voice was strong. He was not the little old man that was going guilty.
When Tracy texted me the sentence, I was actually kind of underwhelmed. I expected a life sentence. And of course, California has a moratorium on the death penalty, so I knew that couldn't happen. But it just got my wheels turning, thinking, this guy, he never stopped. I just can't imagine that he stopped attacking people. That doesn't make sense to me. So I feel like there's more to his story, that there are more victims out there that we'll never know about.
I think Paul Haynes got it right when he said he knows there are some other people.
When he listed the questions that he'd like to ask DeAngelo.
He was doing this forever. How many didn't get reported? How many women were afraid this man came in their house? He might come back. I can't tell anybody this happened.
Or how many weren't ever linked to him. Sick people like that, they don't stop.
Well, I really love the fact that the judge listed people who were the heroes of this story, and he mentioned Paul Haynes, Michelle McNamara, and Carol Daly. I thought that was great. They know that if it weren't for these amateur sleuths, that this would have never been solved.
Well, Paul Haynes wasn't an amateur.
He was the policeman.
Yeah.
Michelle and
Carol Daly.
They just took the ball and ran with it and did their own investigation outside of what the law enforcement was doing. Basically, they solved the case. Looking at it now, if you read what she wrote, she knew that he was going to be our ex-policeman.
That was one of her theories. She had a couple.
Oh, I know she had it. She was right on the nail.
Well, thank God for DNA.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the success in finding Joseph DeAngelo through the genetic genealogy testing, it's opened the door on so many cold cases, and I understand that departments around the world are trying to use this technology to find the cold case perpetrators.
Well, we really hope you enjoy this recast. Some of the information is a bit dated. We still think it's worth a listen to. And if you have not read I'll Be Gone in the Dark, please read it. Michelle and then Paul Haynes did such a good job. It's one of the best true crime books I've read in a very long time. And we dedicate this episode to the victims of the Golden State Killer.
Paul Haynes is a Los Angeles-based writer. Known as the Kid in Michelle McNamara's I'll Be Gone in the Dark, Paul worked closely with Michelle as her researcher and investigative partner and helped finish the book after her death. Originally from South Florida, Paul's work with Michelle was the culmination of a decade-long obsession with unsolved serial cases and the Golden State Killer in particular. He has also worked as a film critic, video editor, and screenwriter, and is currently co-executive producing the HBO docuseries of Michelle's book. Welcome, Paul. Can you tell us a little bit about Michelle?
Yeah, so Michelle, I think, was drawn into true crime early in life when she was in high school. There was a girl in her neighborhood, she grew up in Oak Park, suburb of Chicago, who was murdered while jogging. Michelle didn't know this girl, but it was in close enough proximity to her, and they may have had mutual friends that haunted her. That was her port of entry into true crime and unsolved murders, specifically unsolved stranger crimes. I think that was Michelle's primary category of interest. And this case, the Golden State Killer, which is a name that Michelle coined. Previously, the offender was known as the East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker, had a few different monikers. It just seemed like a case that was destined to collide with Michelle. It's a case that just seemed designed for her sensibilities. We first connected in 2011, shortly after her initial piece of writing about this case. I had been doing a lot of work on it independently for no good reason, for no practical objective. A lot of the work we've been doing was similar. Over time, we developed rapport and corresponded pretty much daily for a 2-year period. We had met in 2012. Her father was living in South Florida, which is where I was living and it's where I'm from. She did a piece for Los Angeles Magazine about this case in 2013. It was published, I believe, in April. On the strength of that piece, she sold a book to HarperCollins, which became I'll Be Gone in the Dark.
Now, I hear she had a nickname for you?
The Kid. The Kid is the nickname that she gave me for the LA Magazine piece, and that's what we retained for the book. Now, I'm no longer really a kid. I'm 37 now, although perhaps I should omit numbers at this point. It might be to my advantage. But when we first connected, I was 28, 29. I guess I was relatively younger than a lot of the other people in the true crime sleuthing community. So I guess that was my most distinctive feature at that point, was my youth. I mean, I feel like a kid, for better or worse, and I'll embrace the nickname still.
Well, how is Patton Oswalt dealing with the posthumous fame that Michelle has received?
I can't speak for Patton. It's been challenging for him, as you can imagine. The sudden death of Michelle was devastating for all of us, but most of all for him. He was committed to ensuring that Michelle's life work, essentially, was completed to the degree that it could be completed posthumously and released into the world. And I think its success has surprised all of us. Certainly, we expected the book to do well. It has become the second best-selling true crime book of all time. It's a thrill, but leavened by sadness that Michelle hasn't been able to enjoy it and hasn't been able to enjoy the case being resolved. That's, I think, the saddest part of it.
Yes, definitely.
Now, what role did you and Billy Jensen play in the research for I'll Be Gone in the Dark? And was it a difficult decision to complete the book after Michelle had passed away?
Billy Jensen came in posthumously. He and Michelle had been acquainted, and they co-presented a panel at South by Southwest, and he lives part-time in Los Angeles, so they would get together periodically. On the book, it was just me and Michelle. I was Michelle's researcher and her investigative partner, and then after Michelle passed, obviously there was a few days of distance. I didn't really reach out to anybody. I kind of just waited. An awful weekend immediately following her death. And then I had heard from Patton's assistant on Sunday. She advised me that Billy Jensen, whom I didn't know, had reached out, offered his services to help complete the book. Billy Jensen, his background, I mean, he's an investigative journalist. He has a long career in journalism as an editor and digital media person, and he helped assemble the parts that Michelle had written for the book. There was really no structure to the book at that point because Michelle hadn't really fully considered it. I think for Michelle, really writing the book was secondary to investigating this case and attempting to identify this offender, and that writing the book gave her this kind of vehicle that legitimized her investment of time and resources and gave her closer access to case materials and personnel, investigators that had been working on this case. We had to figure out after her death how she would have structured the book. She had submitted, I think, only 2 big chunks of writing to the publisher. So there were unfinished pieces and parts, and then pieces that maybe were first drafts for the LA Magazine piece. And we went through, and Billy kind of worked on the chronology of it. Then writing the third part of the book, Billy and I co-authored it. My role in the completion of the book, I worked closely with Jennifer Barth, who was the editor. I wrote the parts of the main text that were essential to the case that Michelle hadn't gotten around to writing. They're presented as editor's notes in the book. Photo clearance, photo captions. Billy created a Facebook page in an attempt to generate tips. And I think working on this case, there were 3 or 4 main avenues that Michelle and I felt were the most viable to identifying this perpetrator. For me, it was always the geography, the fact that this offender was active in 3 or 4 different geographic areas at distinct times, suggesting that he was living in these areas. And then the genealogy, the DNA, which at the time that Michelle and I were working on the case, I don't think we were aware of GEDmatch. It was after Michelle's passing that GEDmatch first entered the discussion. Michelle was using services such as YSearch and Ancestry.com that would essentially just spit back a list of possible surnames. We weren't looking at actual relatives at that point. And then, of course, the notion of a tip that led to the perpetrator's identity. And then, of course, just re-examining the case files and looking for that piece of information, that clue, that person of interest that may have been overlooked or just missed at the time, that in hindsight has a different significance. So those are the 4 main avenues, and ultimately it was a forensic genealogy that led to this offender's identity. And Michelle was really excited about that avenue. Paul Haynes obviously saw the value in it. He's a criminalist. He's a science person. And Bill Jensen, who's, I think, his wife is a neuroscientist, also saw the viability of that. Yeah, I know it was a long-winded answer.
I have to say that I really enjoyed how the book was laid out, because any parts that Michelle had started that you and Billy filled in, it was noted. So you knew that she had been working on this. She just hadn't quite finished it yet.
Right. And we wanted to make it very clear what was her voice and what was not her voice. In some instances, there was a chapter